Where has my world gone? Why can't I see my friends? Why can't I see my family?
$15,796 people are currently in hospital with coronavirus. 21,678 have now sadly died in hospital.
Coronavirus pandemic.
Tell us briefly about the Imperial College results that sparked this worldwide panic. You believe they were flawed. These were the initial results that were coming out and the modelling that was saying, oh, millions are going to die. Here it was 150,000 are going to die. You thought that was flawed. Tell us why.
One is the paper was never published, which is normal scientific behavior. The second thing, it wasn't peer-reviewed. That means looked upon by other people, which is also normal scientific procedure. So it was more like an internal departmental communication. And then the big mistake that the Imperial Group was underestimating the number or the proportion of very mild cases that would never be detected. That's the main thing with that prediction. And it's fascinating how it changed the policy of the world.
They predicted millions of cases of death, not of prevalence or incidence, but death. That is not materializing. So we're seeing millions of cases, small amount of death. Millions of cases, small amount of death. And the reason I'm making that point is because we're going to compare this to flu and say, is this significantly different from influenza A and B? And if not, why has our response been what it is? So deaths, per the CDC, 24,000 to 62,000 deaths each year. We had about 45 million total cases in 2017 with about 62,000 deaths, or a 0.13 chance of death from flu in the United States. As you know, our other numbers were 0.02. So the lethality of COVID-19 is much less. Now, you've got hotbeds of it in New York, but again, we went over the numbers, 0.1% chance of death. Widespread, small amount of deaths. It's similar to flu, as a matter of fact. If we follow the science, as we've been asked to do, I'm following the science. This data is generated by the CDC, World Health Organization. The testing is generated by what we have done here. So we are following the science.
Around 99.9% of those who catch it will recover. And that's quite similar to the flu. Around 90% of the people who die have pre-existing health problems and are even older than I am. Those are the facts. The coronavirus is no bigger a killer than the flu can be.
How many people who have no other morbidities under the age of 60 have died from this illness?
Who have no other morbidities?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you how many people under 65 have died. And obviously
Under
some of those
60,
with other morbidities may well have
morbidities,
survived. A morbidity doesn't mean you're...
350. You're more likely to drown. There's 400 people a year that drown, right? So I think we have to get things a bit in context.
What comfort would that offer to the families of those who've lost
Every
loved ones?
death is tragic, but believe me, we're already in the largest recession for 300 years. In fact, it's not just one recession. The Bank of England have said the economy will shrink by 14%. That's the equivalent of 2 recessions. It's a depression. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have 2 million more unemployed people within a year. Imagine the agony of 2 million more unemployed people. How many deaths might flow from that? How many deaths are flowing from the fact that we've got half as many A&E appointments at the moment? Cancer patients not being seen, people with heart disease not being seen. And the collateral damage of this campaign of fear and lockdown has to be taken into account. Very soon, I believe lockdown will be causing more deaths than the virus.
Perhaps some of you have already noticed that the talking head Fauci has quietly admitted in a scientific paper that the death rates that they originally claimed justified the actions we're seeing now actually are on par with annual flu statistics. And perhaps some of you saw that the Chinese study that originally justified the harsh measures the world has since taken was retracted. And they have released a new study that puts a completely different contagion rate on record. And it is a fraction of the original one stated.
We have both been in the ER through swine flu and through bird flu. Did we shut down for those? Were they much less dangerous than COVID? Is the flu less dangerous than COVID? Let's look at the death rates. No, it's not. They're similar in prevalence and in death rate.
If you take these numbers into account, they suggest that the infection fatality rate for this new coronavirus is likely to be in the same ballpark as seasonal influenza. Of course, there is still a little bit of uncertainty about the exact number, but it's clearly very different compared to the original thoughts or speculations or preliminary data that suggested a much, much higher infection fatality rate. We also try to estimate what is the absolute risk if you're less than 65, and we try to compare that against the risk of dying if you drive your car over a given distance. In doing this, we try to correct for the number of days that the pandemic is ongoing, so you can get an estimate per day. In many locations like Germany, the risk of dying from coronavirus until we did the analysis on April 4 is in the range of the risk of dying driving from home to work, or even less.
2.3 million die from dementia. 1.7 million die from neonatal death. 1.6 million die from diarrheal diseases. 1.3 million die in road accidents. Are we going to shut down the roads now? Are we going to make cars and trucks illegal because of the 1.3 million people that die on the roads? Compare that to the 40,000 coronavirus deaths. 1.3 million, 40,000. Can you see the overreaction yet? The list isn't finished. 1.2 million die of liver disease, 1.2 million of tuberculosis, another 1.2 million of kidney disease, another million of digestive disease, another million of AIDS, 800,000 by suicide. There's a suicide epidemic. There's 20 times more people killing themselves than dying of coronavirus. Lock down the world. Save everyone from themselves. Malaria kills 700,000. Homicide kills 390,000. All of these are more than coronavirus. Nutritional deficiencies kill more people. Meningitis, drowning, alcohol, hepatitis, fire.
Do we even know the real fatality rate of coronavirus? And what is it?
Well, it's around 0.1%.
We were told it was 3% initially, 2%. Are you saying now if it's 0.1, that's pretty much the same fatality rate as the regular flu, isn't it?
I think it's a bit higher, actually. I had said before in Sweden that this is like a severe influenza. I don't think that's completely true. It will be a bit more severe than influenza, but not maybe double, but not tenfold.
So that makes it 0.1 to 0.3? There's a study to get out of it? Or? Yeah, just go with that. So it suggests that the patient's salivary is 10.
Because this is, for the overwhelming majority of people with no serious underlying conditions, this is a very mild epidemic. In the Cabinet Office papers published with the National Risk Assessment, they have listed all the pandemics since 1918. The mortality of this one is right down the bottom, lower than any of the others.
The evidence is clear, isn't it, that this virus has taken a terrible toll on the population?
No, the evidence is not clear to that effect. More than 9/10 of the deaths are cases in which the death certificate shows that there were multiple causes of death, and coronavirus was only one of them. This is a virus that attacks people with really serious pre-existing vulnerabilities, and that's consistent with all the statistical analyses.
Yes, but they wouldn't necessarily have killed them at this point in time, would they? They might have lived with them for many years.
No, not for many years. Almost all of these people are very old and suffering from quite serious conditions serious enough to be mentioned as a cause of death on the certificate. The overwhelming majority of them would have died a bit later, but not much later anyway.
L'aula della menzogna. Almeno qui si applica il principio di Giambattista Vico, verum ipsum factum. E allora avete sentito e avete dato i numeri, li voglio dare anch'io, no dattis, no pagani, non dite anche qui 25.000 morti, non è vero, non usate i morti per retorica e per terrorismo. I dati dell'Istituto Superiore della Sanità dicono che il 96,3% sono morti per altre patologie. Esattamente i dati, i numeri, dice questo. è la verità, è la verità.
Colleghi.
Falli a leggere,
Collega.
esattamente così. Il 60% sono morti per altre patologie, detto dall'Istituto Superiore della Sanità. Se non lo sai, studia.
Collega Sgarbi, si rivolga. Collega Sgarbi.
In Germania siamo uniti nella liberazione contro l'ipocrisia e le menzogne, contro le falsificazioni, contro i falsi numeri che vengono dati per terrorizzare gli italiani. I 25.000 morti, lo diceva il professor Bassetti, sono morti di infarto, di cancro, di altre patologie. Non usiamoli per umiliare l'Italia, non usiamoli per dare ai cittadini false notizie. Date i numeri, controllateli e sfido in onore te Trizzino a guardare i numeri. Se ci avete detto che i numeri li danno tutti, ma non diano numeri falsi. Non sono morte in Italia 25.000 persone di coronavirus. Non è vero, è un modo per terrorizzare gli italiani e imporre una dittatura del consenso. È ridicolo.
COVID on their death certificate, it doesn't necessarily mean they were infected because many of them haven't been tested, so we just need to understand the difference. It's worth remembering again that the ONS rates are people who got COVID on their death certificate. It doesn't necessarily mean they were infected because many of them haven't been tested, so we just need to understand the difference.
A Minnesota state senator says officials are asking doctors to fill out death certificates with diagnosis of COVID-19, whether the person died of it or not.
Brace yourselves. And please pay attention and let what I'm about to tell you sink in. The assumption of COVID-19 death can be made even without testing. Based on assumption alone, the death can be reported to the public as another COVID-19 casualty.
Expert, a doctor looking into the data saying, for example, when we see these death rates in Italy and elsewhere, how do we know that all those people actually died of coronavirus rather than, for example, in Italy, they have a very high rate of hospital-acquired infections? And so how do we know that these numbers are accurate? And you raise these questions and people jump down your throat straight away.
What's interesting to me, too, is when someone dies in this country right now, they're not talking about the high blood pressure, the diabetes, the stroke. They say, did they die from COVID? We've been to hundreds of autopsies. You don't talk about one thing. You talk about comorbidities. Their vessels were narrowed. Their lungs were a smoker. COVID was part of it. It is not the reason they died, folks. It is one of many reasons. So to be so simplistic to say that's a COVID death because they have COVID, you know how many people die with pneumonia? Or people that die from with flu, I should say. It's not from flu. Their lungs were compromised by COPD. They had a heart attack 2 years ago. They have a weakened body. We aren't pressured to test for flu. But ER doctors now, my friends that I talk to say, it's interesting, when I'm writing up my death report, I'm being pressured to add COVID. Why is that? Why are we being pressured to add COVID? To maybe increase the numbers and make it look a little bit worse than it is? I think so. So this is what I'm hearing from physicians I talk to in Wisconsin, New York, and everywhere.
I've never really received coaching from the Vital Statistics Agency in terms of how to do a death certificate, but basically, I felt like they were saying, you don't have to have a confirmed laboratory test for COVID-19 in order to make the death certificate be COVID-19. So
Wait. Sir, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that and what you just said, I think is critically important. Can you repeat what you just said, please?
Well, last Friday, I received a 7-page document that sort of told me that if I had an 86-year-old patient that had pneumonia but was never tested for COVID-19, but sometime after she came down with pneumonia, we learned that she had been exposed to her son, who had no symptoms, but later on was identified with COVID-19, that it would be appropriate to diagnose on the death certificate COVID-19. Now, we've not done that. If someone has the pneumonia and it's in the middle of a flu epidemic, and I don't have a test on influenza, I don't diagnose influenza on the death certificate. I will say this elderly patient died of pneumonia.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but my heart is sinking right now as you're telling me this. You're a doctor. Why in the world would they be sending you out information to fill out death certificates, whether the person's been diagnosed with COVID-19 or not, but then to say in the death certificate this person's death was caused by COVID-19? That does not sound right to me.
The numbers are wrong, completely wrong. They've worked desperately hard to push up the numbers by listing every death as a coronavirus death. No one dies of flu or cancer or heart disease anymore. They're all coronavirus deaths. If there was an aeroplane crash, the people on board would all be put down as dying from the coronavirus.
It's already been published that the CDC directive, the World Health Organization directive, is that anybody who dies at this point dies of COVID. They use long words for it, but that's what they're saying. Anybody who's dead in a hospital is considered a COVID death. You get hit by a truck, you come into the hospital, it's a COVID death, because after all, everybody who dies has a respiratory problem, they stop breathing. So that's a COVID death. And that is to create the terror numbers of all these COVID deaths, which is why the hospitals are pretty empty and the COVID numbers are astonishing and terrible.
So something that would be helpful just to add from an informational level is when reporting sort of COVID cases, to separate out diagnosed with COVID versus had COVID-like symptoms.
Yes.
Because the list of symptoms that could be COVID at this point is like a mile long. So it's like hard to, if you're ill at all, it's like it could be COVID. So just to give people better information, definitely diagnosed with COVID or had COVID-like symptoms. We're conflating those two so that it looks bigger than it is. Then if somebody dies, was COVID a primary cause of the death or not? If somebody has COVID, gets eaten by a shark, we find their arm has COVID, it's going to get recorded as a COVID death.
Is that real?
Basically.
Not that bad, but heart attacks, strokes.
You get hit by a bus.
Cancer.
If you get hit by a bus, go to the hospital and die, and they find that you have COVID, you will be recorded as a COVID death.
Why would they do that, though?
Let me tell you some facts. I've spoken to a lot of people that work in hospitals around the world. They're all being told to say the same thing, that any death is to be labelled as has died as a result of having COVID symptoms. Not heart failure, not cancer, right? None of that stuff. A death as a result of having COVID symptoms. Are you kidding me? And this isn't just in Australia. This is hospitals all around the world. The Alfred COVID unit, right? There is reports from people that I know that the food trays go in full and come out full, untouched.
Technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
They're categorizing potential COVID patients as having died from COVID when they're not even confirmed. People who would have been classified as dying from pneumonia, heart disease, hypertension, if they had COVID, that's what they died from. I see death, and like healthcare professionals, we see death, but like now that it's being thrown at like the public, they're like, oh, what is this? But the reality is, I'm like, people are going to die. People die from every single day from the flu, from comorbidities and whatnot. But now that it's suddenly labeled as corona or COVID causing it, it's like the worst thing ever. And I'm like, the nursing homes don't take me as like not compassionate, but I'm like, people need to pass on. Like, they are at the end of their life, and we continually postpone it and postpone it. If you get the flu, like, and you're old, you're gonna be higher at risk. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah. The CDC issued a special document that's a guidance on filling out death certificates. And they've essentially gone away from their usual protocols where you want to have some certainty about the cause of death. And they've said that even if there's suspicion that COVID might be the cause of death, that you should just put that as the cause of death on the death certificate without any further scrutiny. And it instructed them that in the usual procedure when there's a health crisis, that they normally would send bodies of people suspected to die related to the crisis for autopsy to the medical examiner. But it said in this case to not send any bodies to the medical examiner, to just essentially label them as COVID-19 deaths.
I mean, let's just take someone getting hit by a bus and they collapse a lung and they go into the emergency room and they're there for 15, 20 minutes. Blood work comes back, COVID test comes back positive, and they die 20 minutes later because of their collapsed lung. We're going to put that down as COVID-19? That doesn't make any sense.
The stimulus bill that was intended to help with the hospitals that were being overrun with COVID patients created an incentive to record something as COVID that is difficult to say no to, especially if your hospital is going bankrupt for lack of other patients. So the hospital's in a bind right now. there's a bunch of hospitals that they're furloughing doctors, as you were mentioning. If your hospital's half full, it's hard to make ends meet. So now you've got if I just check this box, I get $8,000. Put them on a ventilator for 5 minutes, I get $39,000. Or I got to fire some doctors. So this is a tough moral quandary. It's like what you can do.
Interview after interview with these doctors talking about how there's no precedent of any kind of guesswork on an autopsy and on a death certificate. You just say the evidence. And yet this is the first time they're being encouraged to write down the COVID-19. And you hear doctor after doctor talking about how peculiar this is. And I mean, I've gotten emails from people here in the UK telling me of scenarios where they took in their 80-something-year-old, grandfather with kidney failure. He was forced to sign a do not resuscitate order. He was told later he had COVID-19 symptoms. He died. Later, they were told he was never tested positive, but he was being qualified as a death of that type. I mean, we're hearing this over and over again. It's almost flabbergasting to hear. Somebody told me, I think it was Dr. Buttar told me a couple days ago, that someone was driving a car with a face mask on, and he does not believe that those even should be used. Suffered from lack of oxygen, crashed their car, and it was COVID-19. It's just hard to believe that's even happening.
Okay, people, I've just been sent this very long list of reports from all around the world of death certificates being falsified. It just goes on and on. I'm going to scroll down in a minute, but first I'll just read just a couple of the first ones randomly here. My aunt died last week. She had cancer for about 3 months and sadly passed away. But on the death certificate, she died of coronavirus. When my cousin told the doctor this is bullshit, the doctor replied, "We are just following government guidelines." Another one here, kidney care nurse here. "I can vouch for this. I've seen it done. All deaths except fatal shootings or fatal car wrecks are listed as COVID-19. Someone I directly know had his grandmother die. She was marked as a COVID death, even though COVID was completely unrelated." And it just goes on and on and on. "My mother died of Parkinson's disease, but the death certificate said COVID. My mother-in-law went into hospital end of February with kidney and heart failure. She passed away just under a week ago. Spoke to the registrar's office this morning, who tell us that COVID-19 is mentioned on the death certificate." This list just goes on and on.
First on testing. At the start of the month, I set a goal of 100,000 tests a day. Every day, we're ramping up this testing capacity, on track to meet that goal.
So when you are really toxic, your body releases 2 to 3 specific exosomes any one time to get rid of that, to stop them going in the cell. And then you get better. That's what happens. So when you're sick, you release all your immune cells, go to work, your temperature goes up, fluids, your nose runs, your eyes run, you get a cough, all this happens, sputum. So exosomes are part of your immune system. So going back here, what would make these exosomes come out of your cells? This is interesting. Toxins. That would be toxic air, toxins in your food, toxins in your environment, that's what you put on your skin, toxins in the water. Toxins can also be electromagnetic field. Stress and fear. How many people are terrified running around with masks on? And let me just tell you something. These exosomes are so small, they go through your mask, so your mask's pointless. Cancer. Cancer makes exosomes come out. Injuries. Any injuries. Asthma. Immune responses. Infection and diseases all will make the exosomes come out of your cells. Everybody's going to test positive. Look at all these things that release exosomes. Fear and stress, toxic environment.
Yeah, well, it's quite possible that this RNA actually comes from our own cells. So a positive test could just say that we've measured your own RNA. I mean, the thing is, we really don't know what it is, and it doesn't seem to correlate with presenting with actual clinical illness. So lots of people who don't have any symptoms and didn't get ill test positive for this, as well as many people who are ill and have symptoms test negative. So since we don't really know what we're testing, in my opinion, we can't trust the results of this test at all.
So the more you test, the more positives you get, the prevalence number goes up, and the death rate stays the same. So it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And as we move through this data, what I want you to see is millions of cases, small amount of death. Millions of cases, small amount of death. And you will see that in every state. And since we're talking about following the science, we're going to follow the statistics and follow the science.
So with that being said, why would they want to skew the number of deaths due to COVID-19?
Well, fear is a great way to control people, and I worry about that. I worry that sometimes we're so darn interested in just jazzing up the fear factor that, sometimes people's ability to think for themselves is paralyzed if they're frightened enough. And that's not where I want people to be. I want people to say, we're going to get through this. I'm going to use my head. I'm going to go to different sources. I'm going to listen to different sources. And I'm going to think for myself.
Non facciamo di questa l'aula della menzogna. Non mentite. Allora dite la verità. Non fate di questa l'aula della menzogna. Almeno qui.
I'm begging you to really look into what the hell's going on. I'm begging you to really pay attention to all the shit that doesn't make sense. That's all I'm saying to you. Because you have to admit that this stuff doesn't make sense.
Right, so when were you told a fatality happened? Because the homeless man that we are told that just died, we've just seen the police take him away to the hospital. I'm filming this now. The police you're in your communal area, my building, and you're lying to us, spreading fear, telling us that this man died, and he's just been down there and saw that he is not dead. He has just been taken to the hospital by the police. He spoke to both the police and the homeless man. The man was a bit drunk. He asked him if he was okay, and he was fine. This was 5 to 10 minutes ago, and now you're coming up here spreading lies and fear and telling me this man is dead, and he is not dead. This man is not dead. Take them letters, take them somewhere else, because that man is not dead. Until you find out if this man's really dead and prove that, then you need to stop putting these letters on there.
Can I ask you to stop filming?
Can I ask your name?
I'm from One Housing.
You're from One Housing. Can I ask your name? When they put a letter under your door saying the man's dead, he's not dead, he's fine. The man is absolutely fine. The man's fine. He's putting letters under our door saying the man's dead. The man's not dead. He just saw him 5 minutes ago being taken by the police. Now these are coming here in their little suits telling us this man's dead, and this man is not dead. We have just seen the police take him to the hospital 5 minutes ago. You are liars. You are spreading fear for no reason. No one died in this building today. Nobody died. I have let you respond, and you stood there and lied. You have.
Can you stop filming?
Okay, no. You're in my building outside my door causing fear amongst my community. Okay, go on. So show me who died. It's legal. I'm legally allowed to. Go for it. Go on. I did.
No, you didn't. Can you stop filming this?
No, go on.
Right, in that case, no.
I can film. Go on. I'd like the answer. What time did you get this report? Can I just ask?
About a couple of hours ago.
A couple of hours ago, but we've literally saw this man taken away 10 minutes ago, healthy. Can I ask who gave you the report that this man was dead? From One Housing. One Housing told you that this man was dead, so you came around in your suits to spread fear amongst. Look at them children in there.